fire us up and let me know when you're ready. Scott, you there? Muted. Oh, Jay's joining too.
You are all set.
All right. Got Jay joining right now. So we have more than a quorum. Good evening. My name is Peter Beardmore. I'm Vice Chairman of the Finance Committee, and it is 7:01. And I am calling this meeting to order. Terry Birchfield is not able to join tonight, so I will be chairing tonight's meeting. And I have not heard from Dave Passios yet, so I'm assuming he'll join shortly. Just to verify that everybody can hear me and can be heard, let's go around the horn. Heather Soroka.
Yep, I can hear you.
Chris Menard.
Yep.
Evan Waters.
I can hear you.
Jay Simeone.
Here.
All right. Heather Lemieux.
Here.
And Karen Brochu, Finance Director. Can you hear us, Karen? Give a thumbs up or
Looking for a button.
find your buttons.
I'm muted. Oh.
All right. Well, we'll let Karen figure it out. And I will read the Finance Committee agenda thing. Oh, Dave is texting me right now. He's having network issues, so may not be on. In accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast over the Lunenburg Public Access Channel. The town of Lunenburg, in response to the COVID-19 coronavirus, is currently following the guidance from the Lunenburg Board of Health, Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and the CDC regarding the virus and steps communities can take to prevent the spread. And all town facilities actually are mostly open, some under limited availability. In accordance with the governor's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, all public meetings are being conducted remotely. This meeting will be broadcast live through local access cable, on Facebook Live, and on the public access Facebook page, and will be able to be found on the Lunenburg Access YouTube channel within 24 hours after the meeting. The following information is provided for members of the public that would like to participate in the meeting remotely. To participate remotely from a computer, please join the Zoom with the Zoom application and point to meeting number 850-9712-6313. Or from a telephone, you can dial 888-475-4499 and enter webinar ID 850-9712-6313 #. No participant ID is needed. Just press pound when asked, and telephone users may dial *9 to request to speak after joining the meeting. The agenda lists all topics which may be discussed at the meeting and are those reasonably anticipated by the chair. Votes may be taken as a result of these discussions. Not all items listed may in fact be discussed, and other items not listed may also be brought up for discussion to the extent permitted by the open meeting law. Okay. So let's hit agenda item 1. Are there any announcements? Any announcements? Seeing none. Moving on to agenda item number 2. Public comment. Any public comment from members of the board? Seeing none. Any public comment from members of the public? The exception of the town manager and the town finance director, we don't have members of the public, so I'm assuming that's a no. Okay. Item number 3, consent calendar. I believe the town manager will be talking us through this item.
Yes, thank you.
Is it possible to put up the warrant booklet?
It sure is. Bear with me while I figure out how to do that. Screen 2. There we go. All right. Can you see that?
Yes.
All right.
So if we go to the index, that'll probably be the easiest way to follow along.
Which is where? Here? Nope.
Nope. One more. Yep, there you go. All right, so similar to the last two town meetings we've had, we did consent calendars. So they're articles that do not generate a lot of discussion, that there would be no objection to, where we think that it would be a unanimous or close to unanimous vote. And articles as well that would be passed over would be included in that. So on Tuesday night, I recommended 15 articles to the select board that I would include in the consent calendar. And they included Article 1, reports from committees, which there are none. Article 2, reauthorize revolving funds. So those are the same revolving funds we've had, and the limits are the same. So there's no change from previous year there. The payment of prior year expense is $145 from free cash. That should be a non-controversial article. Article 4, the amendment to the fiscal 21 budget. Right now, and I talked to the finance director today, we should be able to pass over this article.
So that will be on the consent calendar as a passover.
Yes, if it's, if we're not able to pass over, if there's actually amendments, it wouldn't be included in the consent calendar.
Which number was that again?
4.
Okay.
Article 7 is the regular stabilization fund. Article 8, the special purpose stabilization fund. Article 10, the transfer deposit into the OPEB trust fund.
Which one?
Article
10? OPEB?
10.
Yep.
Article 11 for the sewer enterprise budget. Article 12, the sewer capital reserve stabilization fund. Article 13 for the solid waste enterprise fund. Article 14 for the water enterprise fund. Article 15 for the PEG access enterprise. And now if you can scroll down, Peter, please. Article 22 and 23, both the rescinding borrowing articles. And Article 27, which is the amendment to add positions to the grid for the SAP.
Okay. So before I get into questions, does anybody on the committee have any questions, or is everybody clear exactly what we're talking about with respect to a consent calendar and how that works? I just want to make sure everybody.
I am not.
You're not. Okay. I'm glad I asked the question. So,
Thank you.
Heather, can you just give a synopsis of how this works?
Yes, so the articles that will be included in the consent calendar, the town moderator will read all those motions, and they'll be up on the projector, the front of the stadium stage. And so all the motions will be there, and he'll read off each one of the motions as part of the consent calendar. If there's any objection to any one of them to be included in the consent calendar, it gets pulled out. So they get voted as a block, and it will have to be, because Article 3 is a prior year expense bill, that requires a 9/10 vote. It means they'll all require a 9/10 vote.
So my only question with respect to the stabilization articles, 7 and 8,
Mhm.
is those are typically articles that wind up maybe being adjusted based on other moneyed articles that we may or may not draw money and then add additional money back in later on to stabilization. Is this a prudent way of doing this, or will we likely find, do you think we'll likely find ourselves needing to reopen either one of those based on the moneyed articles that come later?
I don't believe so because we still have unappropriated free cash and that's a source of those two articles. So it's not a matter of changing a raise and appropriation amount. And there is available free cash if that. would-
Okay. Okay. Any other questions or comments on this?
Yeah, the only question I have is for Article 1, the committee reports, why didn't we just use that for the TC Pasio's committee report? Like, what's the
That-
difference there?
Is an article, so for your annual report that we print every year,
Yeah,
if the committee or board didn't get a report in that needed to be read to the town, that's typically where that falls.
oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Evening, Mr. Passios. Dave, can you hear me okay? Not
Good
doing
evening.
well.
Finally got in. Everything
All right.
went haywire at 5 minutes to 7.
All right, good. Glad you can hear me. All right. So Dave, we were talking about the consent calendar, which you just missed most of the discussion. Any other questions relevant to the consent calendar?
Yes.
Mr. Simeoni?
Article, the sewer budget article, was that on the consent calendar before?
Yes, it was last year. Mhm.
And what is Article 27 about?
27 are positions that the Personnel Committee already voted on to approve to put into the Schedule A, into the grid. So titles of positions that assign them a grade to be added to the Schedule A grid.
Will there be an explanation of these articles before they're voted, or?
The red.
No, that would be, so the motion would be what, so there's no discussion. So if anyone wants discussion on something, that would have to be pulled out.
But the articles are read by the moderator, right?
Yes.
Just,
So the
yeah, just the
motion
title.
itself, but questions.
Right.
If there were discussion, then it would be something you'd pull from the consent calendar.
Yeah, I would recommend that 27 be pulled out. I think that article should be explained.
Okay.
Okay, let's hold that thought and we'll put together a motion in a minute.
Okay.
Peter, there was one article that was potentially going to be passed over that I don't know if it ended up on the consent calendar, but I don't believe an article that could potentially be passed over should be on any consent calendar.
We actually did that. We actually did have a couple of Passover articles on the consent calendar at either the spring or the fall town meeting. And it didn't seem to be too controversial. The only one that we're passing over on this list, if we were to approve it, would be Article 4, which is amendments to appropriations and sources of funds for FY 2021, which is a standard funds transfer article.
Right, and at the moment, is that, if I could through you to Heather, is that the one that's the small dollar amount, or is there no dollar amount in that presently?
No dollar amount. We anticipate that we won't need any transfers for that article, so it would be passed over. The article I think you're thinking of is probably the prior year bill, Article 3, $145.
No, I was just trying to make sure I had the correct one in my head. Yeah, that small amount is the other article. I just was trying to figure out which one was which.
That is,
Yeah,
that is
okay.
also on the calendar, though, just so you're aware. Article 3 is on the consent.
Yeah, and that number hasn't changed through the whole budget season, so unless there's a dramatic change in that number, there's really no need not to pass over, not to put it on the consent. Sorry.
So, let me just get a sense for the committee with respect to Article 27. We could do this a couple of different ways. We could discuss and then vote on that one specifically, or we could just straw poll it, figure out how we feel about Article 27, and then take a motion on everything except or to include. Any other thoughts on Article 27?
I mean, it wouldn't make or break my decision either way.
Nor would I, but I'd be happy to defer to Jay.
Yeah.
I kind of
Well-
side with Jay because, any changes to
Yeah.
payroll and I had
Position.
the right. Yeah, it's a compensation adjustment within the system. And I think he's right. I think it should be explained to the members of town meeting exactly what's going on so they can decide for themselves what effect it has.
Do you need me to make a motion, Peter? Is that what you're?
Would you like to?
Well, I just make a motion to remove Article 27 from the consent calendar and add it to the regular.
So I
Leave it in the warrant.
believe procedurally, we would need a motion to approve the proposed consent calendar with the exception of Article 27.
Before you vote, can I just add something I thought of? There may be other articles that we're able to pass over, such as if we're not at a point where we can, the select board has voted on a collective bargaining agreement, those articles would be able to be passed over. So those would also be added to the consent calendar if they're going to be passed over.
So would we revisit this either at our next meeting and or caucus before the meeting, before the town
Probably
meeting?
caucus before the meeting because the select board has another meeting on April 27th. So unless you had a meeting on the 29th, where I could update the committee, then I would say it would be before the meeting.
Okay, so would it still make sense to take a vote tonight and kind of get it on the record and then we can do
Yeah,
it?
I think so, because I'll report back to the select board on their Tuesday meeting.
Okay. Okay,
Heather,
Um,
I just have to ask a question.
Heather,
Go ahead,
Okay.
Heather, and then I
Heather
have one,
Soroka.
please.
Yeah. In regard to Article 27, the positions are already there, correct? Those positions are already being held by people and they're being paid salaries? Am I correct or no?
Yes.
Okay.
Let
I
me
just wanted to,
pull up let me just confirm that because there's the
I thought that was the case when we went over it and recommended approval at that meeting when we went through all the warrant articles.
so the reserve officer, I'm trying to go off memory here. If you can open up.
Right. I'm sorry. I thought there were positions that were held and they were already being paid. Like
There-
grade 8.
Wasn't the reserve officer already employed, but there was no place to put him in the payroll
is
right.
system?
That is correct. Yeah. They didn't have a place anywhere.
so looking at the article, just to be clear, the positions are assistant to the sewer business manager at grade 8.
So that position is the only one I think that does not have someone in it. That would,
New.
Hmm?
That's a new position.
yes.
Assistant to the business manager for Barbara.
Yeah, and that's in the budget. And then there's intermittent heavy equipment operator at grade 9. reserve officer at grade 10, and network administrator at grade 13.
Yes.
So that's 3 new positions, isn't it?
No, so the reserve officer, those are existing personnel.
That one, yeah.
The intermittent equipment operator, that was a similar situation where we didn't have a place for them within the union, and they weren't in the non-union group, so it got added to the grid, so they'd have somewhere to fall.
But that's a
And
new position, isn't it? We didn't have that position last year.
it's new to the grid, but it's not
Yeah.
new. No.
It was a vacancy that we hired into over the course of the last year. Is that,
They were being paid.
That started as a seasonal position, didn't it?
No, they were not union employees of the DPW, but paid as equipment operators during snow removal time. So
Right.
it's not new. There were people already doing those duties. They just had nowhere to fall.
okay. Any other discussion? Dave Passios, did you have another comment?
Yeah, again, I'm sorry I missed the discussion, but the 2 TC Passios articles, are they on the list or off the list?
They're not included.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Based on the discussion that we just had, let me just enumerate these. I will entertain a motion to approve a consent calendar, which will include Articles 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 22, and 23. Anybody want to make that? Chris Menard made the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Jay Simeone. Any further discussion? Okay, let's call the roll. All in favor, please say aye or nay. Heather Soroka,
Aye.
Chris Menard,
Aye.
Evan Waters,
Aye.
Jay Simeone,
Aye.
Dave Passios,
I'm
and an aye for myself. Okay. Next item is position salary information. So this is an item that's been on a few agendas over the last several meetings. This originated from a request that Mrs. Soroka made a couple of months ago to get some visibility of the totality of our positions in both the town and school department, and get an idea in terms of how we were rationalizing the salaries and contracts thereof. And that may not be the best explanation, but it's the best I can do on short notice. So I have actually not looked at those documents in at least a couple of weeks, but we did want to put a point on the calendar to discuss it. We can discuss it in some detail tonight, and or open a discussion and have a more detailed discussion following town meeting. It's really the pleasure of the board. But I think the first person I'd recognize to see if you have any comment, since you made the request, is Mrs. Soroka. Any thoughts on this?
Well, I have my notes. I was, with the schools and their 2% and 2.5% increase across all groups in relation to them, and then the town salaries and their increases, their 2% and 2.5, their increases fall within the salary reserve that the town has set aside, and the schools do not. The 2% may fall into the salary reserve that they have only for this year. And since they don't have a salary reserve going forward for a 5-year plan, I don't know what they're going to do when they finish their contract negotiations this year, which they're working on right now. It's kind of alarming. that,
And did your calculation, Heather, include the teachers and the other unions or just the teachers?
all groups,
All groups within the school department?
yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's an interesting observation.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to calculate it because, you know, they have a salary reserve, they said, of $283,000. And then if they do a 2%, they will fall within it with 265 just next year, though. That's their salary reserve just for next year's budget. They didn't, when we asked about a salary reserve going forward, they
Well-
only said they had one for next year.
Well, technically, if you were contracted the amount, you wouldn't have a salary reserve. That would fall into your budget. So it would be absorbed by whatever the increase is to the budget. You wouldn't have a salary reserve for a contracted term.
Okay, so that will just fall into their budget somewhere?
It would have to, yeah. Yeah.
Right. That's what I'm like. It's a concern I have that they don't really have the budget for an increase of, and they're dealing with, I believe, 3 or 4 contract negotiations right now. Yeah.
Heather,
I thought they were, yeah.
yeah, you've got a good point there. What Peter said is correct. The salary reserve is to fund the first year of the contract. After that, it becomes part of the annual operating budget. But if that amount that's in reserve right now is not going to be enough to absorb all of the collective bargaining agreements that come on in that year, in that first year, then they're going to have a shortfall. Heather, that is correct, isn't
Yeah,
it?
they will it's depending on what percentage they give all of the groups.
Well, there are other options. So the school committee has the ability to transfer funds from available funds from other lines if they so choose. And they also have the ability to, they don't have to give the same level of increase every year, right? So you could have a 3-year
Right.
contract and fund at different rates for different years.
Yeah, I'm just curious how they're gonna absorb an increase like that.
I mean, the
Okay.
problem is that none of these are settled contracts, so I'm not quite sure how appropriate it is to get into the nuts and bolts of how you're gonna fund them when they're not fully negotiated.
Right. And the other interesting thing that she had, there was a 4.92% increase in salaries at the school when you add in all the new additional roles that they have. With all the new people that they've got, that they're hiring. They also have 83.5 teachers on step 12, which is the highest step. Out of 141.6 teachers. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle that.
Yeah. That was probably the most surprising thing when I looked at that. When I looked at that report, was that they've got 60% of their teaching staff at step 12. And
And
we
those steps
discussed-
were created in the last contract, Peter.
Yeah.
What was the top 3 steps were added?
Well, yeah, but there was some leveling that, I mean, Heather was probably more familiar with it than I am, but there was some leveling that went on when they did that, but I'm not quite sure how. Any,
We're not here to debate the contract either.
I mean, it's not.
No. It was just interesting things that I saw.
Mhm.
In comparison with the salaries.
It seems to me, though, that the finance committee should have a role in advising whoever is doing the negotiations as to what our financial forecasts can absorb, and with respect to all the other things that are going on in our budgets, over the next 5 or whatever years. And I don't know if other towns put anything like that in place for their finance committees. And I think, certainly, Heather Lemieux, are you involved in the negotiations? Are you able to advise them on that? The school committee?
I've been keeping in contact with the superintendent and business manager during this set of negotiations.
You have a seat on the negotiating committee, don't you?
Voting, yeah.
So my position on this is a little bit, I don't think that it's necessarily the role of the finance committee to proactively advise either the town manager or the school committee on contracts. But I do think that the finance committee should be advised by the town manager and by the superintendent of schools their salary strategy, for lack of a better term. And that was the point of my no vote when it came to the contract approvals at the fall town meeting. Is I just at no point has any of this been kind of holistically rationalized to me. And I think that as a finance committee, we ought to understand, what is the long-term plan in terms of getting to fair, equitable, competitive labor contracts. And and maybe that's a goal for next year. Maybe we figure out a way to get to that. Because I don't see an intent or a clear path to get there, other than I view this as a sort of an early discussion that might be able to lead us down that path.
Yeah, I don't think it's anything we can do this year. At least in time for budget season, but I prefer to have the holistic view and the long-term view of finances rather than kind of just someone who stands at the town meeting and recommends one way or another. I mean, we are the only legislative committee in the town.
Yes. True.
So.
True. Okay. Any other comments, or do you guys think that this should be something that we should perhaps revisit, in the new term in May or June or thereafter, or how do you think we should this discussion come up again with perhaps a path to some sort of action or plan or goal for the coming year?
I think it's good discussion over the quote non-budget months to be looking at things like this, to look at it in context of their, at least on the school side, the 5-year plan that they've laid out. Same thing, honestly, on the police and fire, so that we have that entire view, compounded, like I said, with the capital, the 10-year capital plans, and and kind of look at the long-term view of the budget at that point.
Yeah.
Well, my question is, how are we going to know what is fair and equitable? Are we going to compare local salaries to find out if our people are being paid fairly and equitable? How are we going to go about that? Because I think that is the work that they do when they do contract negotiations, that they go to the table with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's pre and post work that can be done, right? There's a strategic view, a much higher level view that says, here's the range we think we're going to be in based on the information that we have now. Okay, we close that book. It becomes a contractual, executive session discussion at the Board of Selectmen, at the Select Board and the School Committee. We butt out of it. And then when it's done, the town manager and the superintendent comes back and says, okay, this is the information that was presented. This is where we are. This is where we're going. And these are the gaps based on the plan that we briefed you on the front end. Know that we can take a more active role than that. We don't really have the authority to do so, other than, having a place, an appropriate place in the discussion so that we can make an informed recommendation at town meeting for both the budget as well as contract approvals at town meeting.
Okay, because I remember Heather saying that the fire was underpaid, that they found that the fire was being underpaid. Is that correct, Heather, when we talked about that article at last town meeting? We
Compared
found that,
to the
yeah,
data
compared-
that they provided. Yeah.
But there was, I mean, and I have no reason to contest that information, but we have seen no actual supporting information other than that characterization.
Well, we did know that it's been hard to get paramedics, so that's at least part of that discussion.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of anecdotal
But
information.
there's other factors involved with that.
Paramedics, though, that's supply and demand. That's not necessarily
Yeah.
the norm for the salaries.
I mean, we were told for years that it was impossible to hire heavy equipment operators, and now we've got heavy equipment operators. So, I mean, there's a
It's
lot.
all supply and demand when you're hiring and negotiating salaries.
So I would recommend that we revisit this again, perhaps for some directional planning purposes when it comes to the new term that's, for the next fiscal year. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Well, wouldn't
Yeah.
these be voted on at perhaps special town meeting? These
Some of them
contracts,
might.
are they going to be in that time frame?
Ones that don't get voted on at this town meeting would get voted on at special.
So certainly we're going to have some discussion on it leading into special town meeting.
the school ones don't get voted on at all.
Right.
No, it's just a
We
budget.
just wrote the one number.
It's just a budget discussion.
Yeah.
Can that change? Can we break apart the school budget?
No, not unless you're a governor or a legislator.
Can we lobby them to do that? One line item for 60% of the budget is ridiculous.
There's a vacant seat on the school committee coming up, Chris.
We can talk offline.
Yeah,
on that
vote
one.
on, vote.
And
Okay,
I get
any-
chastised
Before you vote to change
for
it, budget.
volunteering too much.
Sorry, Jay, you said you had something?
Oh, just vote to change their overall budget number. That's the only thing we can do.
Yep.
As a, town.
Okay, any further discussion on this? Okay.
Peter,
I don't
can we
see it.
just put a note to have revisited it, even if it's briefly in June?
Yes. Yeah, and I don't think that requires a vote or anything. I just, we'll
Right. Just a
between-
note for one of the agendas in June.
Yeah, and obviously I'll make the note to Terry. Go from there. In fact, let me write that down before I forget. Okay, next agenda item is policies. So this is something that we collectively agreed to punt on until after the warrant article recommendations. I don't know if everybody's gotten an opportunity to read or peruse the fiscal policies. I don't believe we made any amendments to fiscal policies in several years. There have been two that have been generally discussed in our meetings over the last 6 months or so. One has been the raising of the threshold for capital items. And the other is one that I've raised, but have not found an appropriate place for it in the policies regarding oversight of large expenditures that sit outside of the omnibus budget. For mine, my intent is to get some time with the town manager and or town council to figure out what an appropriate place for that would be in the policies, but I don't have more to report on that right now. And I see Mr. Passios has his hand up, so I will ask him for any commentary.
Yeah, Capital Planning Committee met last evening, and I said that I would pass this on to this committee under this agenda item. Under the capital planning policies, Board of Selectmen's policies related to capital planning, the Capital Planning Committee voted a recommendation to increase the threshold for a capital project from $10,000 to $20,000. That's a recommendation to the Finance Committee, which we hope in turn the Finance Committee will pass on to the Board of Selectmen. We talked about a couple other things, but felt there were no other changes really needed at this point. That number, by the way, shows up in section 3.2 capital budget. Section A, capital projects, paragraph 1 are projects specifically to projects and with useful life of 3 years or longer and must meet that dollar threshold, and that move is from 10,000 to 20,000. And then in the next paragraph, paragraph 2, individual items that cost at least change from 10,000 to 20,000, and groups of items of the same purpose that cost at least change from 10,000 to 20,000 are both capital items. There had been discussion about moving it as high as 50,000 over the last few months. It was felt after discussion with the town manager that a phased approach and taking this one step first and see how it affects the next fiscal year, budgeting wise, was a prudent way to approach it. So short of a complete policy review being passed on to the Board of Selectmen, that committee would like to see these changes move forward to the Board of Selectmen as early as possible so that they could be in effect for the next budgetary process.
What was this a unanimous vote on the part of the Capital Planning Committee?
Yes, it was.
And has this been discussed with Council on Aging Director and the Library Director?
Was not discussed with the individual department heads. It was discussed extensively with Heather, and we had asked her a number of weeks ago to kind of try to wrap her head around what we were talking about to see how she felt it affected her ability to develop the budget and projects. Also, Heather gave us a breakdown over the next, I believe it was 5 years, Heather, of the projects that are already on the capital plan that would be below this 20,000 threshold. And they were all facilities projects. So when you worry, when you're thinking library, the projects that affect the library are all facilities projects. And then we had a pretty substantial discussion about supporting the infrastructure of the town through facilities with budgetary money rather than these small capital projects. And that seemed to set well with the committee.
So today, my concern here is the smaller budget departments where they need something that is between $10,000 and $20,000. And that's a big bite if you're the library or the Council on Aging or parks or which I understand is part of DPW, but versus the school department, which could easily absorb that amount. I if we were to budget facilities for everything separately, like that would be that would change everything. And the threshold discussion would be a different discussion. But we're not there yet. So I asked the town manager, could you comment on this? And is this, directionally, do you think that that's where we're likely to go? Is that we have a separate facilities budget that could absorb the lumpiness of some of these items, particularly for the smaller departments?
Well, our facilities budget, if you're looking at the omnibus budget, is voted separately, facilities and grounds. So I don't think there's really a big impact that way or change that would be needed. The discussion that I had with the capital planning committee, I agreed that the number that is in the current policy is outdated. And that my thought would be to incrementally increase it, like Mr. Passio said. If it were a substantial increase from where it is, it would definitely change how I develop the budget. And this may as well. Looking ahead right now, there's not that many projects that fall within that range, but it doesn't mean to say that there won't be come next fiscal year. But I think what they recommended is reasonable for a change.
How is the wording again? Does it say that it would say that under 20,000 doesn't need to be a capital, or it can't be a capital?
It can't be. It has to meet that threshold. I believe, Heather, is there some,
20,000 and over, and a useful life of 3 years or longer. That's the threshold that has to be met to be on the capital plan. Be considered a capital project.
unless you can group items together to get to that 20,000. And I don't believe that has to be within one department. I mean, it could be, I don't know, IT infrastructure for the entire town side or something like that.
I think it's worded similar, similar items.
Right.
How do library books not create that threshold?
That's covered under their budget, and it's a requirement of their spending. That's where they get their state aid money from.
One other thing we discussed in regards to the funding shift is that there has not been a year in recent years that we have not raised and appropriated money to fund the capital budget. So in effect, it's possible that some of that raise and appropriate money that's gone into the capital plan would just shift to the departmental budget and take it away, take it out of the capital planning process and allow the departments to just move forward with their projects funded that way.
I guess my concern was the things like the kitchen, which seemed to be a small issue that became a large issue, that if it was just dealt with when it was a small issue, you wouldn't have to wait to make its turn onto the capital.
This proposed change would theoretically would help that, right?
That's what I would want it to help. And that's why I'm wondering if 20,000 is enough. I mean,
Chris,
there's not much you can do building wise for 20 grand anymore.
Right. A few of us did feel that way, but to do it in one fell swoop. Heather, if you wouldn't mind, through the chair, could you give the ranges that you found in surrounding towns? Because Heather did research that.
Yes, so they were between 15 and 25,000, the towns that I looked at. I had it with me. Yeah. Harvard, Bolton, Ashburnham, Groton, Hadley, and Westminster, the towns that I looked at. So in a split, basically, between them.
So we're clearly below.
Yes.
Everybody else is too. I mean, in my view on this is that it's incremental enough that it doesn't raise alarms. I think if you were to tell me it would be 30 or 40, my immediate reaction would be, let's make sure that everybody's covered here and protected. And I would want to do a lot more due diligence on the idea. Whereas, based on the information that's just been shared, 20,000 seems like, okay, well, we'll try it at 20 and see what happens, right? And if it needs to be changed, we'll change it. But it seems like based on what we've heard over the last 2 years, particularly around the small number items, that this would allow us to focus more and do a better job at prioritizing the larger issues. And by us, I mean not us, but the capital planning.
So would you have the ability to put annual in the operating budget to buy a cruiser every year with this change?
No.
Because I'd like to see things like that. I mean, if we're just buying a cruiser or two every year, I'd rather just set down that path and not debate it as part of the capital plan.
Chris, I think that's another one that we should take a hard look at. And if, we can sell it something for a fiscal year or two from now, because there are communities that do that. All of their cruiser turnover is funded within the departmental budget.
Yeah, and I don't know, Heather, if you'd like to do it that way, but it seems to me that if you're just buying them that way, include it in the budget and be done.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to give that more thought as well. We're on a rotation now. So this year there were 3 cruisers that were requested, and we're funding 2. So to have that fluctuation within the budget where it's a $70,000 fluctuation, that might be challenging in those years.
Evan?
So if we do go forward with moving it to 20,000, are we able to have somebody come in, but if they're not able to lump it together with another department or program to get it up to over 20,000, are they able to petition to have it become a special consideration for capital, or is that a hard pass?
So if it were a department requesting it go through the budget process, it would be part of what they submit for their budget request. And obviously everything is dependent upon available funding. So, and depending on the level of requests is whether it would make it through or not, what the priorities are. So
Say somebody had an idea for something that ended up costing $18,000 or $19,000 even. If the threshold is set at 20,000, it cannot be considered. There's no petition method or consideration method that could be used to say, we'll drop this one down to 19,000 and change, or is it has to reach the 20,000 threshold?
yeah, it would have to reach the $20,000 threshold.
Okay.
Gold plated a little bit.
There are a few more options. Okay, any further discussion on this topic? Are we, do people feel like we're prepared to vote on this, or is this something that requires further thought and discussion?
Honestly, Peter, I'd be more comfortable if we have a specific agenda item that says that we're going to discuss and vote a recommendation for this exact item to be passed on to the select board. I think it's be much cleaner that way. And, we've got a little bit of time before it needs to be in place to be ready for the next budget cycle.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'd like to see the words and have the words, sent to us 48 hours before the vote on it. And
I think that's fair.
I'd also, like to hear Terry's position on that. Spent a lot of time on that.
Any further discussion on policies.
So Peter, earlier in the year, you had a debt policy. Is that still, did we satisfy that?
Yeah, I don't, so the
Is that just
debt
an
discussion,
analysis?
yeah, so that, I'm glad you brought that up, Chris. So the debt discussion was really not a discussion around the debt policy, but rather wanting to look at our debt capacity relative to some of the upcoming projects. So, you know, based on the results of what we got from the consultants and the town manager, at this point, based on what we're forecasting for potential debt projects, I don't see a need to recommend a change in that policy right now.
The other thing I guess I'd like to see, and I don't know if this is a policy, I don't know if we can write policy, but I'd like to see that any budget that relates to a committee, another committee, whether it's sewer or parks or any of them, that budget be presented to that committee prior to coming to us for a vote.
Amen. So I think that is a procedural policy, not a fiscal policy, which we don't really have any written procedural policies outside of the charter. But I think that that's something that we could, if we collectively decided that that's what we wanted, we could certainly request that of the town manager to enforce before bringing to the finance committee. And I would support that
Okay.
wholeheartedly.
Like I did appreciate this year having, the 2 days to look over things before the meeting. I don't know if that was done in the past. But I do think that this is another one that going into the next budget cycle, we should try to enforce in whatever means we have to do that.
So Jay or Heather Lemieux or Karen, is there any, has the finance committee before Dave or I joined, has the finance committee ever had a sort of written procedural policy that outlines things like off budget items or timelines or those types of things like Chris just brought up with committees that oversee budgets that get brought to us? Has that ever happened before?
Not in my recollection.
Mine neither.
I don't believe so either.
Okay.
I think it's always been driven by timetables set by
Yeah.
bylaw or the,
Charter.
charter, yes.
But I feel like there's probably room for a procedural document that specifies some of these things, that does not conflict with the charter or the timelines, but seeks to set finance committee expectations and procedures. I mean, I'm just asking that for discussion purposes. I haven't written it in my mind, but the type of things that Chris has proposed this year around the timing, even potentially this outside of omnibus budget kind of thing. I think that it warrants a more detailed discussion with the town manager and maybe town council, but I feel like a procedural document might serve us well in dealing with those issues as they come around.
I think so. Even if you had the procedure for onboarding new people, it would help them to understand, what's coming and what to expect. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know why we couldn't write a procedure.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think it's something to noodle on and maybe discuss at a future off-budget meeting. But I think it's good food for thought anyway. All right. So suffice to say, at this point, we will seek to have an agenda item, possibly for our next meeting, that will specify the language around the policy change for capital planning. Anybody have any objection to that? Okay. Any further discussion on policies? Hearing none. Minutes.
Oh, I did not get a chance to do those in my life.
I
I
feel
will
your
be
pain.
working so hard to do the minutes.
Heather, I sympathize.
Thanks, Heather.
I did a whole year of this. And
Oh,
Yeah,
you don't need to make any excuses to me.
oh my God. 15 hours of your life
Yep.
to sit down with minutes.
Speaking
Telling
of
you,
which,
the ledger does our minutes for us at the
they do a great job, by the way. Very
So
good
should
job.
I just cut and paste them?
it might be plagiarism, you need copyright, but
You know, maybe we should get dictation software and let it listen to the meeting and write it
Send a.
with a computer.
So we do have a budget item that will theoretically
Yeah.
cover some of these requirements in the future. Mrs. Lemieux, could you outline like what our expectations should be in the new year, assuming that this passes by acclamation?
So we'd have to go through the proper hiring process for someone to take that position, or if it were more than one person. But I would anticipate they could support the finance committee, personnel committee, capital planning committee, and stormwater. Those are the four major ones that are lacking someone to take minutes, that they don't have an associated staff member.
So
Parks
What
doesn't.
what about parks? They don't have one.
parks.
Nope.
Whoa,
No,
easy,
no.
guys, easy.
That's
Dave will do them. He's retiring.
Hey, Chris, you heard, I'm not allowed to volunteer for anything else.
So just Mr. Jeffries and I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and he actually spoke during public comment at last night's school committee meeting, which was really the only 10-minute portion of the school committee that I caught fully, to address, some opportunities that he sees for the town and the school department to partner, particularly with respect to the new civics requirement that the school committee has adopted, and is looking for some opportunity to collaborate with the school department around involving students in town government. And I don't know if he's brought this up with anybody else. He brought it up with me a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if he's discussed it with you, Mrs. Lemieux, but I think that there may be some opportunity there. We obviously pursued the tax credit program with the Council on Aging. That didn't pan out, but is there potential to perhaps look at getting some students involved in like that type of thing, like minutes and.
Are you talking about pro bono or?
Yeah, so it would be, so there's a community service requirement now or option as part of the civics requirement in the high school. So, is this something that we could potentially tap into and partner with, the social studies department at the high school to include some students in perhaps capturing minutes?
It is a conversation I've had with Mr. Jeffries before. I've also talked to the superintendent about if that were a possibility for students. I know that in the past there has been some difficulty with getting consistent, even like a student representative at the school committee meetings. So, and that's what we really need consistency. There's a requirement that the minutes are done in a certain time frame and get filed with the town clerk. So to have something that's consistent and dependable, I think is better for the efficiency of town government. But it is something we have looked at.
Okay. All right. Committee and department reports. Anybody have any committee reports?
Do, if nobody else wants to start.
Please.
Basically, our earlier agenda item took care of the capital planning meeting. So I think we've pretty much covered that. That was more or less the entire subject for that meeting. TCP Design Committee met last evening. Went over our plans going into spring town meeting. We have decided to ask the architects and engineers not to attend. We will be giving what it says in the warrant there, an update presentation, but a much more thorough one than the last one, because we do have all of the information now. A 500+ page document was forwarded to us. We will get that up on the website after we've had an opportunity to digest more of it. And we will be taking information from that 500-page report to develop the presentation for town meeting. There is, at this point, still no number to attach to the next article for the adjustment of our charge as a committee. That will definitely be available after our next meeting 2 weeks from last night. That was a drop dead date that everybody was given, including the architects, to come up with an agreed number that we're going to need for that article. If there's any other questions, I'll try to answer them.
Any questions for Mr. Passios? Any other committee reports? The school committee met last night. I was unable to attend, or I actually caught the first 15 minutes of the public session, but was shuttling kids to and from practices and was unable to attend. So if anybody else attended and would like to comment, please do. Otherwise, we can move on. Any other committee reports?
If I could very quickly, Peter,
Please.
just to make a comment. It's not actually the result of a meeting, but as a result of my moving around town on the weekends as a parks commissioner and checking around during the week. Actually, it's very nice to see spring has sprung. We're seeing practices on the ball fields at Marshall. I haven't been over to McNally during the week, but I'm sure that's active over there also. And we have a fairly substantial list of Earth Day week projects that are being developed. Most of the volunteers coming forward have been youth groups, but we're going to accommodate as many as we can. And any individual interested, please go to the MyRec site and take a look at the information there.
So I've seen announcements on Facebook for both a Marshall Park cleanup as well as, I want to say, a town common cleanup or something. Is that correct? Heather, you're muted.
The gazebo, the Turkey Hill Lions Club, they're doing a volunteer cleanup at the.
And do you know when that is?
That is the 17th, Saturday the 17th.
And is that the same day as the Marshall Park event, Dave? Or is that
I'm not sure. Chris Sullivan is coordinating that, and our plan was to spread projects out over the entire week, but I'm not sure where any of those projects stand right at the moment.
Okay. All right.
The DPW is also offering bags for anyone that wants to be part of a neighborhood cleanup. So you can stop by the DPW, grab some bags, and then contact them when they need to be collected.
So I would echo, Dave, your comments about seeing kids on fields and around town. Man, that is awesome. My kid's playing youth football in the spring right now. I'm constantly around those fields, and it is awesome to see kids out there. So I've missed it. Okay, any other committee reports or comments relative to other committees? Okay, town manager, finance director report.
I don't have anything else to report for tonight.
I have
Oh.
none.
I have just a couple of questions slash informational items. We have construction starting next week on Mass Avenue.
Yes.
And how long is that expected to run?
Till it was 8 to 10 weeks was the phase. Hold on one second. Pull up.
And we're going to go to one lane on 2A during construction? Is that the idea?
There, phase one will have one lane, and then in that phase, I think is 8 to 10 weeks, and then phase 2 and 3 will be two-way traffic.
Okay. And are we detouring traffic while we're doing that, or how is that working?
Yes.
I saw some
What are they
signs
doing?
covered at the bottom of Pleasant Street about detours, so I'm assuming I got a detour coming down my road.
To answer Jay's question, it's a bridge replacement project that Mass DOT is doing, as not through the town. So this spring, though, will be a bridge replacement project on Pleasant Street for that bridge. But
So that's what I was getting to, is we've got a bridge replacement project going on Mass Ave in front of Mackey's that's going to run 8 to 10 weeks. And Pleasant Street is happening while that's happening, or are we coordinating that?
the detours don't won't be coincide with one another. As far as they shouldn't directly impact one another.
Okay.
The phase one, so Mass Ave will be reduced to a single lane of traffic, temporary traffic signals installed to correct the flow of traffic. During this phase, Richards Way at Mass Ave will be closed off and local traffic on Richards Way will be detoured up White Street to access Richards Way, Maysfield Road, Jacqueline Drive, and Edith Lane from the northern end at White Street. Upon completion of this phase, two-lane traffic on Mass Ave will be restored. The temporary traffic signals will be removed and Richards Way will be reopened. It's estimated this phase will take 3 to 4 months to complete.
Say again. I'm sorry. How long?
3 to 4 months to complete.
Ooh.
So, I mean, I know I've been asking about Pleasant Street for 2 years, and I hate to say this, but I really don't think we should be doing Pleasant Street while we're doing this.
It's already in the works as far as,
So, just by way of observation, I found myself riding a bicycle on Reservoir Road the other day, and I noted that there was a sign that reduced traffic to 25 miles an hour because it was thickly settled. And if you're walking or riding a bike down Reservoir Road and you take just a little observation of what's happening there, then you take a bike or walk down Pleasant Street, you'll note that Pleasant Street is substantially more settled than anywhere on the east side of the town. And I'm extremely concerned about the traffic in this area. I think we're going to get snarled, and I think we're going to have police all over the place directing traffic if we're not careful about this. So I'm just advising caution. I'm very concerned that we're going to have a serious problem on the west side of town for the next several months. Okay. Anything else for the town manager? Okay, public comment. Any further comments from either the board or members of the public? Okay, hearing none. Next meetings, 4/22, which is a Thursday, we will have a regular meeting. And our next meeting after that will be Saturday, May 1st, annual town meeting, live and in person. Last chance, any comments or questions? Hearing none, I would be happy to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Chris Menard moved. Second was from Jay Simeoni. All in favor, Heather Soroka,
Aye.
Chris Menard,
Aye.
Evan Waters,
Aye.
Jay Simeoni,
Aye.
Dave Passios,
Aye.
and an aye for myself. We are adjourned.